Your take, I mean, they're saying they're firing on all cylinders globally as well. This is a company that we're wondering how China would have remained for them in terms of strength, not only from a supply chain perspective, from a demand perspective. I'm looking at Greater China pulling in 14.762 billion in the previous quarter. And Luca, the CFO of Apple, really saying that the strength, this was a record June quarter. All our product categories, all-time highs, and indeed in each of our geographic segments.
Yeah, the short way to say it is all three of these companies, Apple, Microsoft, Google, are just performing phenomenal. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, there's not really a lot to pick with these numbers. They just look really good. They're executing perfectly. Their customers are coming back in droves. They all have secular growth trends. I mean, this is just a really positive trend. You're seeing it through the numbers now with all three groups. I mean, even Microsoft was trading off here a little bit. The numbers are all just really strong, and the performance of the stocks have reflected that, you know, to a certain extent. But I mean, from a fundamental case, you can't really ask for much more than these companies are giving you right now.
Well, that's, I guess, kind of the issue, right? So Apple obviously blowing out the numbers. The stock is up after hours, to be clear, but not by that much. So what does that tell you? Is it just mean that there's sort of we got to take a little pause here on this rally?
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing wrong. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, yeah. I mean, I think the bigger surprise would have been had they just met or missed, right? That would have been much more of a, oh, there's something different happening. I think people just from a general trending perspective were expecting upside. Maybe not to this level of magnitude, but certainly I think upside was expected. So, you know, from our point going forward, again, the fundamental stories are just phenomenal here. Yeah. So any type of correction, any type of reversion based upon that stuff would be an idea for us to be buying here, so, not selling off by any stretch.
So, Jeremy, we are getting headlines now, some commentary out of the CFO of Microsoft, and some of the story there with Microsoft actually applies to Apple as well. The company saying that chip shortages will have some impact on the company this year, but it also says that corporate and consumer PC demand remains strong. This idea here that there's still a pretty healthy demand for the products, and even with some of the supply chain issues, it does appear, at least according to the CFO of Microsoft, that they'll be able to work through those.
Yeah, I think those are all short-term in nature, right? At the end of the day, they'll figure it out. I mean, if you're a supplier to Apple and Microsoft, you're going to figure it out or you're going to lose a lot of business. So at the end of the day, you know, I think that's where these companies, again, they just hold such strong sway. And if those actually hold up with the other trends that are going on, you know, you talked about Apple and services, that's a phenomenal business right now. Yeah. Azure from Microsoft is just absolutely phenomenal. And those things are the things that are actually accelerating in their businesses, or at least growing exceedingly fast. So, I mean, even if the chip shortage is a short-term dislocation, I mean, the main drivers and the main things we're looking for are still doing very well, and the numbers showed it today.
And of course, some of the concerns surrounding these big tech companies, not only is antitrust for all of them, but also the ongoing relationship between US and China, and whether that's going to impact in any way the supply chain. Do you feel it would?
Yeah, look, we wrote extensively on this last year, Caroline, which is that the supply chain is fragmenting. We have said that over the course of the next 3 or 4 years, we will see capacity to the tune of about 30% in electronics manufacturing move and redistribute along different Southeast Asian nations, South Asian nations, and even stateside. We've seen that in electronics manufacturing already, go to Malaysia, go to India even. And we're starting to see that in semiconductors as well. And here's 2 points I want to make. If this was a revenue beat with the component shortages, and this is going to continue over the next couple of quarters, can you imagine what they would have done had, you know, this shortage not occurred? So that's point number one. Point number two is that PC demand. We've reiterated this again and again and again. PCs are not dead. They had a great year last year. They're having a great year this year, and they will have likely a decent year next year. I think we're going to have to change our tune on PCs from 1 PC per household or a PC and a half per household to 1 PC per person. And if we're going to get these rolling waves,
home, right?
1 per person.
Yeah, one. And if we're going to get these
rolling,
rolling,
talk to my son. He's got about like 6.
He deserves 2, Romain. And the other point I want to make is on on margins, right? So this cycle of the products driving services, which in turn drives products, which in turn drives services, Apple's got that nailed.
Yeah.
And this is going to improve EPS continuously.
Jeremy, back to you. Obviously, you mentioned that any dips for these tech mega caps may be a reason to buy. But of course, we've seen some weakness in some of the more speculative areas of the market lately. I'm curious what your view is on tech outside of these clear winners. So, okay, like Microsoft, Alphabet, Apple, you know, they're just going to keep putting up quarters like this that are probably going to be phenomenal. What is your view about the risk reward when you go a little bit further out the risk spectrum right now?
It's a great question. You know, I mean, at the end of the day, if you own a lot of those companies, you don't have to own a lot of the SPAC names.
Yeah.
Those are a lot of market cap right then and there. If you throw Amazon, you know, I mean, I know it fits in consumer discretionary, but I mean, Amazon Web Services is a huge component of their business. So if you combine those, you have a lot of market cap to play with right then and there. So on the more speculative side, you know, we're worried about, you know, it seems like in the semi-cycle that the cycle component of that seems to have somewhat gone away to a certain extent. I don't know if that's going to continue going forward. I'd be a little more cautious there in that regard. But again, at the end of the day, there are secular trends, and especially with these larger companies doing things, you know, I think the speculative names, you could, you know, for most investors, you could hide in these 4 or 5 large cap technology names and be just fine.
Well, that seems to be the strategy that a lot of people have taken. In fact, when a lot of the jitters came back into this market, that seemed to sort of reawaken Apple, which of course hadn't hit a record high for months, and all of a sudden it's hit several successive record highs. Of course, similar story with Alphabet and some of the other names out there. I am curious about the safety of these companies because there's still always going to be that narrative out there, Jeremy, that there's some sort of peak here, that this just can't go any further. The valuations are in the trillions, and at some point it just has to top out here. Is that really the case?
I think we were saying that in the hundreds of billions, right? You know, I mean, that argument has been there for a long time. Can the big keep getting bigger? Well, I mean, you know, the quarters are kind of proven out that at least for now they can be. Now, the question is, does somebody intervene, being a government entity, to come in and say, well, you're just too big now and you need to do something about that? That's always a risk that's going to be out there with these large companies. It's something we pay attention to, but frankly, you can't put a real multiple around. What we pay a lot of attention to is the fundamentals of the business. And despite their size, they're still accelerating their growth profiles. I mean, Azure is not small at all, and it grew 50% year over year. I mean, that's phenomenal. I mean, there aren't very many small businesses that are growing at that level. So, you know, as far as like when we hit capacity on that, I don't see it at this point right now. I don't think there's really much evidence that we're there.